Dear students, welcome to MOOC's course on NGOs and Sustainable Development. In Unit 1, Module 1, we will see an introduction to Sustainable Development Goals. The learning objectives of this module are, by the end of this module, you will be able to learn the concept sustainability and sustainable development, understand what are the Sustainable Development Goals. Now let us see what is sustainable development. As per World Commission on Environment and Development, Our Common Future, during 1987, sustainable development has been defined as sustainable development is said to be there when the needs of the present generation are met without compromising the ability to meet the needs of the future generation. With the rapid globalization and swift changeover from an agricultural economy to an industrial and service oriented economy, the world is witnessing massive consumption and large scale depletion of its natural resources. This leads to several questions. Does this large scale depletion of the natural resources and massive consumption lead to a country's real prosperity? Does this result in improved health, nation's wealth and an individual standard of living? Or is such consumption leading to a marginal growth in certain spheres at the cost of others? What are its impact on the overall sustainability? Now these questions need to be answered. In recent times, these questions have gained widespread importance and researchers are frenziedly searching for answers. In 1915, the Canadian Commission on Conservation defined sustainable development as each generation has the right to use the natural capital, but must follow the principle that natural capital should not be reduced. Sustainable development is defined as the development that caters to the needs of the present generation without jeopardizing the requirements of the future generation. Living on this planet Earth, having a good quality of life without causing any harm to the environment is the central principle of sustainable development. It was since the industrial era during 1930s and the technological era during 1950s that the usage of resources increased exponentially, which created an imbalance in all spheres of life. It resulted in environmental pollution, ecosystem imbalance because of excessive usage of resources and in some instances unnecessarily. The planet Earth is hence currently in grave danger, which has been caused by none other than ourselves. He is not just using the resources, but we are in fact stealing a lot from the planet Earth while not compensating for what we are swindling. Mankind is causing more damage than ever to the planet Earth, to the environment also. The Earth has got tilted as shown in the figure. From a green Earth, we are now moving towards a darker future and a dead Earth. The United Nations General Assembly passed Resolution 38/161 in 1983, establishing a special commission considering these dire circumstances. Their duties included long-term environmental strategies, environmental awareness on the link between resources, people, environment and development, role of international community, aspirational goals for protecting the environment. The duties included proposing long-term environmental strategies for achieving sustainable development which needs to be achieved by 2000 and beyond. To make suggestions on how environmental awareness could lead to a greater cooperation among developed and developing nations who are at different stages of economic and social development, achieving shared and mutually beneficial goals. It is expected that these take into account the linkages between the players, namely people, resources, environment and development. In the light of other reports and recommendations, it was suggested to investigate the mechanisms by which the international community could address the environmental challenges more effectively. Taking into account the pertinent resolutions of this session of the special character of the Governing Council in 1982, a long-term agenda for action plan for the coming decades was suggested. Aspirational goals for the global community were developed to help define and resolve the shared perceptions of long-term environmental issues. Further, appropriate efforts required were suggested to successfully deal with the problems of protecting and enhancing the environment. The Brundtland Report. The Commission later adopted the formal name World Commission on Environment and Development, which is known as WCED. However, it is widely known by the name of the chairman Gro Harlem Brundtland, a medical doctor and a public health advocate. He was Norway's Minister for Environmental Affairs and also the Prime Minister for 3 terms. The Commission had 21 members drawn from across the globe, half representing developing nations. In addition to its fact-finding activities on the state of the global environment, the Commission held 15 meetings in various cities across the globe. They sought first-hand information on the experiences of how people interact with the environment. In 1987, United Nations World Commission on Environment and Development released the report Our Common Future, commonly called the Brundtland Report. The Brundtland Report uses the terms sustainable development, sustainable and sustainability interchangeably, emphasizing the connections among social equity, economic productivity and environmental quality. There are few differences. The US Environmental Protection Agency, commonly called as US EPA, has taken a step forward in bringing out the distinction between sustainability and sustainable development. They have highlighted that sustainability encompasses ideas, aspirations and values that inspire public and private organizations to become better stewards of the environment, to promote positive economic growth and social objectives. While sustainable development emphasizes environmental protection, it does not preclude economic development, and economic development must be environmentally friendly for the present and for the future. UNESCO formulated a distinction between the two concepts as follows. Sustainability is often thought of as a long-term goal, that is, for a more sustainable world, while sustainable development refers to the many processes and pathways required to achieve it. The 3 pillars of sustainable development is given in the figure. As shown, social, environment and economic are considered the 3 pillars of sustainable development. The overlapping themes of sustainability paradigm is given in this figure. Thus, there are 3 dimensions that sustainability seeks to integrate: economic, environment and social, sometimes called the socio-political. Now, let us see the first one, economic. Economic interests define the framework for making decisions, the flow of financial capital and the facilitation of commerce, including the knowledge, skills, competencies and other attributes embodied in individuals that are relevant to economic activity. Number 2, environmental. Environmental aspects recognize the diversity and interdependence within living systems, the goods and services produced by the world's ecosystems and the impact of human waste. Number 3, socio-political. It refers to interactions between institutions and firms and people, functions expressive of human values, aspirations and well-being, ethical issues and decision making that depends upon a collective action. The report sees these 3 elements as part of a highly integrated and cohesive interacting system, though sometimes it is poorly understood system. The intersection of social and economic elements can form the basis of social equity. In the sense of enlightened management, viability is formed through consideration of economic and environmental interests. Between environmental and social elements lies bearability, the recognition that the functioning of societies is dependent on environmental resources and services. At the intersection of all three lies sustainability. Sustainable development. Sustainable development is an organizing principle for meeting human development goals while also sustaining the ability of natural systems to provide the natural resources and ecosystem services on which the economy and society depend. The desired result is the state of society where living conditions and resources are used to continue to meet human needs without undermining the integrity and ability of the natural system. Thus, to redefine sustainable development, it is defined as the development that meets the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generation to meet their own needs. The modern concept of sustainable development is derived mostly from the 1987 Brundtland Report. It is also rooted in earlier ideas about sustainable forest management and 20th century environmental concerns. As the concept of sustainable development developed, it has shifted its focus more towards economic development, social development, environmental protection for the future generations. Sustainable development was first institutionalized with the Rio process initiated at the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. In 2015, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Sustainable Development Goals, very famously known as the SDGs, from 2015 to 2030 and explained how the goals are integrated and indivisible to achieve sustainable development at the global level. They address global challenges, namely poverty, inequity, climate change, environmental degradation, justice and peace, to name a few. The Brundtland Report makes it clear that while sustainable development is enabled by technological advances and economic viability, it is first and foremost a social construct that seeks to improve the quality of life of people physically through the equitable supply of human and ecological goods and services. This is achieved through access to education, systems of justice, health care and strategically by safeguarding the interests of future generations. Looking at sustainability from this perspective, it is understood to be a series of human social movements that have occurred over history. Some of them include human rights, racial equality, gender equity, labor relations and conservation. Millennium Ecosystem Assessment was a project undertaken by over 1,000 internationally recognized experts from 2001 to 2005 who assessed the state of the world's major ecosystem and the consequences for humans as a result of human induced changes. The MEA presents findings as assessments of ecosystem and the ecosystem services by providing services such as food and water, regulating services such as flood control, drought and disease, supporting services such as soil formation and nutrient cycling, and cultural services such as recreational, spiritual, religious and other non-material benefits. MEA has presented three important conclusions. Approximately 60%, that is 15 out of 24 of the ecosystem services examined are being degraded or used unsustainably. 2. There is established as well as evidence that changes being made are causing irreversible changes to the ecosystem. 3. The harmful effects of the degradation of ecosystem are being borne disproportionately by the poor because of growing inequities. Approximately 60% of the ecosystem examined are being degraded, because of air and water pollution. The full cause of the loss and degradation of these ecosystem services are difficult to measure, but the available evidence demonstrates that they are substantial and growing. Many ecosystem services have been degraded as a consequence of actions taken to increase the supply of other services such as food. These trade-offs often shift the cause of degradation from one group of people to another or defer the cause to the future generation. There is established as well as evidence that changes being made are increasingly the likelihood of causing non-linear changes to the ecosystem, such as accelerating or abrupt or potentially irreversible changes that have important consequences for the well-being. Examples of such changes include disease emergence, abrupt alterations in the water quality, creation of dead zones in the coastal waters, and collapse of fisheries and shifts in the regional climate. The harmful effects of degradation of the ecosystem services are being done disproportionately by the poor. This is contributing to the growing inequities and disparities among the groups of people, and sometimes the principal factor causing poverty and social conflict. This is not to say that ecosystem changes such as increased food production have also not helped to lift many people out of poverty or hunger. But these changes have caused harmful effects to communities and individuals, and their plight is majority of the time overlooked. In all regions and particularly in the sub-Saharan African region, the condition and management of the ecosystem services is a dominant factor influencing the prospects for reducing poverty. According to Brundtland report, the concept of sustainable development has developed beyond the initial intergenerational framework to focus more on the goal of socially inclusive and environmentally sustainable economic growth. In 1992, the UN Conference on Environment and Development published the Earth Charter, which outlines the building of a just, sustainable and peaceful global society by 21st century. The Action Plan Agenda 21 for Sustainable Development identified information, integration, participation as the key building blocks to help countries achieve development. Furthermore, Agenda 21 emphasizes that a broad public participation in decision making is a fundamental prerequisite for achieving sustainable development. Sustainable development, like sustainability, is regarded to have three dimensions, namely environment, economy and society. This framework has now been expanded by some of the authors and researchers to include a fourth dimension of culture, institutions and governance. There are criticisms to any study. Similarly, there are criticisms to this report also. The concept of sustainable development has been and still is subject to criticism, including the question of what is to be sustained in sustainable development. It has been argued that there is no such thing as a sustainable use of a non-renewable resource, since any positive rate of exploitation will eventually lead to the exhaustion of the earth's finite stock. This perspective renders the Industrial Revolution as fully unsustainable. The sustainable development debate is based on the assumption that societies need to manage three types of capital: economic, social and natural, which may not be non-substitutable and whose consumption might be irreversible. Natural capital cannot necessarily be substituted by economic capital. While it is possible that we can find ways to replace some of the natural resources, it is much less likely that they will ever be able to replace the ecosystem services such as protection provided by the ozone layer or the climate stabilizing function of the Amazonian forest. The concept of sustainable development has been criticized from different angles. While some see it as paradoxical and regard development as inherently unsustainable, others are disappointed in the lack of progress that has been achieved so far. The Rio Protocol was a huge leap forward. For the first time, the world agreed on a sustainability agenda. In fact, a global consensus was facilitated by neglecting concrete goals and operational details. The Sustainable Development Goals (SDGs) now have concrete targets, unlike the results of the Rio process, but no methods for sanctions. Now, let us see the capacities needed for sustainable development. The capacities required for sustainable development is highlighted in the figure. There are 6 interdependent capacities which are deemed to be necessary for the successful pursuit of sustainable development. These are the capacity to measure progress towards sustainable development, capacity to promote equity within and between generations, the capacity to adapt to shocks and surprises, the capacity to transform the system onto more sustainable development pathways, the capacity to link knowledge with action for sustainability, the capacity to devise governance arrangement that allow people to work together in exercising the other capacities. Here are some serious facts that we need to undertake. Today, more than 1 billion people live in extreme poverty. 8 men have as much wealth as the bottom 3.5 billion poorest of people. In 2017, more than 750 million people went to bed hungry every night, and at the same time, there are approximately 2 billion people who are overweight and obese. In 2017, more than 6 million children died before their 5th birthday because of preventable diseases. That's more than 15,000 deaths each day. Today, about 263 million children and youth are out of school, including 61 million children of primary school age. Currently, 49 countries have no laws specifically protecting women from domestic violence. In 2012, at least 1.8 billion people were exposed to drinking water that was contaminated. Today, more than a billion people don't have access to electricity. The number of people living in slums and shanty towns is now estimated to be 863 million, in contrast to 760 million in 2000 and 650 million in 1990. In 2017, youth were almost 3 times more likely than adults to be unemployed. The number of deaths from natural disaster continues to rise. From 1990 to 2015, more than 1.6 million people died in internationally reported natural disasters. Each year, the world generates roughly 1.3 billion tons of waste, but that's expected to increase to 4 billion tons by 2100. In the United States alone, about $200 billion a year is spent on solid waste management. Tens of thousands of species, including 25% of all mammals, 35% of birds, are now threatened with extinction. This is because of hunting, poaching, pollution, loss of habitat, the arrival of invasive species and other human caused problems. In the context of these scenarios, firstly, how far are we in eradicating poverty? Secondly, human societies are causing more damage than ever to the planet Earth and the environment. Thirdly, inequality and disparity among and between countries is rising. Finally, governance is becoming more complex, especially with the growing influence of technology. Today's problems will escalate quickly and dangerously if we do not urgently and immediately change course. The Sustainable Development Goals gives us a plan to combat and overcome these challenges. The SDGs were formed by United Nations General Assembly and adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and established 17 SDGs as a global roadmap to help us restore the natural world by the end of this decade. This is given in the figure. The first SDG is to eliminate poverty, SDG 2 is to erase hunger, SDG 3 establish good health and well-being, SDG 4 provide quality education, SDG 5 enforce gender equality, SDG 6 is to improve clean water and sanitation, SDG 7 is to grow affordable and clean energy, SDG 8 is to create decent work and economic growth, SDG 9 is to increase industry, innovation and infrastructure, SDG 10 is to reduce inequality, SDG 11 is to mobilize sustainable cities and communities, SDG 12 to influence responsible consumption and production, SDG 13 is to organize climate action, SDG 14 is to develop life below water, SDG 15 is to advance life on land, SDG 16 is to guarantee peace, justice and strong institution, SDG 17 was to build partnership for the above goals. While UNEP is responsible for monitoring only 6 of the 17 goals, all of the SDGs are linked and ultimately impact each other. The SDGs were designed to highlight the linkages between the environmental, social and economic aspects of development and to point out the gaps and opportunities that have been overlooked. The SDGs are used not just by government but also by private sector like manufacturers, corporations and developers. This is used during their planning process with reference to their environmental, social and governance initiatives and when gauging their social return on investment. SDG 6 Clean Water and Sanitation obviously impacts SDG 14 Life Below Water. Similarly, SDG 12 Responsible Consumption and Production certainly impacts SDG 2 that is Zero Hunger and so on. The correlation between SDG indicators are important. For instance, air pollution SDG indicator 11.6.2 is reduced when recycling rates SDG indicator 12.5.1 rise. Since waste that is recycled does not go into the landfills or gets incinerated, that in turn helps species at risk SDG indicator 15.5.1 such as marine life that might otherwise be ingested with harmful plastic pollution. No single SDG can be achieved without dramatically impacting the other goals, which is why global cooperation, coordination and commitment are very important. The Sustainable Development Goals in terms of society, economy and environment can also be categorized as shown in the figure. Now, let us see how we can classify the SDGs 17 into society, economy and environment. Under society, we can take SDG 1 which is poverty, SDG 2 which is hunger, health, well-being, education, gender equality, water and sanitation. Similarly, under economy, we can take SDG 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 that is energy system, work and economic growth, industry and infrastructure, inequalities, sustainable cities, consumption and production. And under environment, we can classify SDG 13 which is climate change, SDG 14 water ecosystem, SDG 15 land ecosystem. In addition to this, we have institutional setting SDG 16 and partnership SDG 17 which is common across all the 3 SDGs. Each of these SDGs we will explore in detail in the next module. Now, let us see some of the questions and answers that will arise from this module. Question 1. What are the three main pillars of sustainability? I think all of you must be aware. They are environment, social and economic. Many businesses are working towards minimizing the use of water, reducing the packaging waste, bringing down the carbon footprints, which all come under environment. These actions cannot only help in reducing cost, but also helps to benefit the economy and hence preserves the environment. For example, reducing the cost of packaging materials and increased mechanisms for energy efficiency can improve the organization's budget position. Walmart recently focused on packaging as part of its zero waste strategy, using suppliers to use less packaging overall and to source more packaging from recycled and repurposed materials. In social, sustainable businesses should have the support and approval of its employees, stakeholders and community it operates in. From social context, organizations are refocusing their efforts on employee retention engagement methods. Under economic, a business needs to be sustainable to function effectively and profitably. Compliance, effective governance and risk management are examples of activities that fall under the economic pillar. Now let us see question 2. Name some challenges of environmental sustainability. The challenges could include global warming due to carbon dioxide emission, air pollution and water contamination, pollution of ocean, seas and inland waters, slow energy transition from non-renewable to renewable sources, extinction of animal species and destruction of the natural habitats, water scarcity, overpopulation, municipal and hazardous waste management. Now let us see question 3. How can we cope with the challenges of sustainability? According to McKinsey's report, the following technological innovations will help shape the sustainability agenda for the years to come. 1. Go in for public electric transport. Adopt cheaper energy storage mechanisms. Go for plastic recycling. Have LED light efficiency. Accessible solar power to every individual are some of the methods by which we can cope sustainability. Now, in this module, we have learnt what is sustainability and sustainable development. We have comprehended what are the 17 SDGs and how they are related to each other and how they form the pillars of sustainability. Thank you.